Hey, what's up everybody? Jonathan THAMES here from Rosie and Ernie Productions. Welcome to the Multimedia Mega Fan channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the brand new film Space Jam: A New Legacy, where real-life NBA player LeBron James has to team up with Bugs Bunny and the Toon Squad against the Warner Brothers Algae Rhythm's Goon Squad in order to rescue his son and save spectators from permanent enslavement into the Warner Brothers servers called the Serververse. I'll start by saying I actually had a much better time with this movie than I anticipated, and thought that it actually wasn't a terrible movie overall on a technical scale. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a good movie, but I guess the fairest point of comparison would be to its 1996 counterpart. To be clear, I was 9 years old when the first Space Jam movie came out, and was really into basketball. And I loved Looney Tunes growing up, so I was actually right within the key demographic of the audience the movie was targeting, so I actually really loved it, and still to this day, get some decent entertainment value from watching it. But now that I'm older, I'm definitely able to identify the fact that the movie was obviously just made as a huge advertising campaign for the NBA and for the Warner Brothers properties, and that it doesn't really offer very much in terms of what I'd normally seek out in watching a film, or be what I would necessarily call, again, a good movie. That being said, my expectations going into this movie, from the perspective of trying to judge it as a crafted piece of cinema, were obviously pretty low. I mean, I really wasn't expecting to get any more from this movie than what the first one had to offer in that regard, and was very much so prepared for it to be just another pretty shameless marketing vessel for Warner Brothers properties. And I will say, the movie is definitely that. To the point that I actually found it to be pretty obnoxious, especially in their pushing of DC property in this movie. I mean, they're not willing as a studio to invest the time, faith, patience, and resources into creating and maintaining a coherent and respectable universe for these DC characters, but they'll sure as hell make sure to overstate their presence and importance into a film that has absolutely nothing to do with them. So, yeah, some pretty shameless self-promoting going on throughout the whole movie. That said, it was kind of fun looking into the crowd during the big game and spotting all of the neat character Easter eggs, albeit a little bit distracting from the movie's action at certain moments. But I do have to say that, much to my surprise, I think this movie does actually offer a little bit more cinematic value than the first film does, and on that merit, I would have to say that it is a slightly superior film. Probably the biggest thing this movie has to offer over its previous installment is the presence of a heartfelt theme and story that centers around LeBron James as a father and the strained relationship with his son Dominic. Now, is the story masterfully or even interestingly fashioned in a way that audiences have absolutely never seen before? I mean, is it the most interesting and innovative story ever told? No, it's not. Not by a long shot. It's actually a pretty run-of-the-mill setup and really doesn't do much of anything to set itself apart from many other similar stories. For example, when the strained relationship ends up pushing Dominic over to the side of the film's antagonist, it definitely reminded me a lot of the movie Hook and the subplot that focuses on Peter and his son Jack's relationship, which ends up enabling Captain Hook to manipulate Jack into siding with him, and creates an extra obstacle in Peter's objective to get his son back. And this movie basically follows the exact same formula, so again, definitely not a unique or original approach to the father-son driven story. But as a father of 3 kids, I do have to defend the fact that the theme pushed in this film is actually one that I feel like will emotionally connect with most fathers at some point during their fatherhood, as it is something I think we all genuinely have to contend with at some point when it comes to handling or mishandling our own expectations as to who or what we want our children to be versus who or what they want to be. And I have to say, I think that that element of the film was definitely handled pretty decently from my perspective, and I did genuinely feel moved by it. It was definitely executed in a way that surpassed my expectations. Another thing is that this plot does incorporate stakes that feel much more consequential compared to the first film, and don't just directly affect the main characters, but also affects a much broader spectrum of people and characters as well. Another pretty major pro for this movie, in my opinion, is Don Cheadle as the film's main antagonist, Algae Rhythm. Now, I'm not saying this is his greatest performance, because it is definitely not that. It's actually somewhat pretty awkward at moments and very over the top, but he delivers it in such a way that I couldn't help but have fun with it. I really didn't feel like he had much to work with from a writing perspective, but he really goes all in, and I think that actually works pretty well to the film's advantage, despite that. And the Looney Tunes themselves are all handled pretty well for the most part, too. I actually really didn't enjoy the setup of the movie at all before any of the Toon characters are introduced. Like, the first 15 or 20 minutes in, I was really going, oh man, this is gonna be pretty bad. But once we were thrown into the Toon world and introduced to Bugs Bunny, I began to genuinely have some fun with the movie. Now, again, it isn't perfect. There are a lot of jokes that fall flat, and a couple of moments that didn't really work very well comedically, in my opinion, but there are a good bit of jokes that I thought landed pretty well, and some moments that actually did work pretty well, and that did seem to genuinely capture that Looney Tunes charm and energy that I grew up loving as a kid. Particularly, I've always been a big fan of Daffy Duck, and I really enjoyed a good handful of Daffy moments in this movie. So I was personally pretty entertained by those. Particularly the scene that introduces him, and whereas that scene does heavily consist of some elements that I gave the film criticism for in regards to the shameless marketing, it is also genuinely a pretty hilarious Daffy Duck moment, so it's not all bad. I also appreciated how, in contrast to the first Space Jam movie, we also get a chance to see our central cartoon protagonist, Bugs, genuinely shine through in a much more substantial way, especially when it comes to a particular decision that he makes at a certain point in the film, and the overall impact that that decision has on the movie's outcome. I was also pretty impressed with how well the characters translated once taking their CGI form, and though I was really hesitant about that element at first, I have to say that their decision to utilize it and when they chose to do so made sense to me from both a narrative and a technical and visual aspect, though I think it is pretty obvious that the narrative was shaped around meeting that technical need. And what I mean by that is that I think the CG characters definitely blend in a lot more pleasantly and function more believably in the environment of the big game than they would had if they were to have remained in their traditional 2D style animation, and I think that that's made pretty evident from the moments where they are in their 2D form and are placed against the background and environment prior to changing into their CG 3D form. Additionally, I think the CG designs for all the characters were all actually really well done. I was really impressed with the amount of detail that went into creating the texture of each character, and again, just how well the colors and graphics blended with the setting that they were placed within. Now, aside from Don Cheadle and the voice cast for the Toons, the acting is pretty bad, but it's almost enjoyably bad to a degree, most especially when it comes to the adult human performers. There are a lot of instances in the film's setup where you can see LeBron is trying really hard, but it's just very clear that he is not an actor, and really doesn't know what the hell he's doing in that regard, but it's evident to me that the movie is pretty self-aware of that element, as it's pretty directly addressed in a line of dialogue. I'll also note that the awkwardness of LeBron's delivery past the first 15 minutes or so in, for me, definitely added to the film's charm rather than subtracted from it. And aside from LeBron himself, the kind of off performance that really stands out in my mind is the one given by the actor that plays his agent. I mean, that guy was something straight out of the Tom and Jerry movie from earlier this year. I mean, his performance was so awkwardly exaggerated and animated that it actually gave the cartoon characters a run for their money. In conclusion, this is definitely a movie that is for some, but not for all. And whereas I'll easily say that I had much more of a positive than negative experience viewing this film, and definitely am able to say that I genuinely got some decent entertainment value from it and am genuinely able to connect to it emotionally to some degree, I can also definitely say with a pretty high degree of confidence that that won't be everyone's takeaway from this movie. I'm pretty sure that a good bit of people will walk away feeling like this was absolutely nothing but a garbage movie with weak and unoriginal writing focused around non-inspirational characters that served merely as a shameless marketing vessel for Warner Brothers properties. And I would have to say that if that is your takeaway on the movie, then it's completely justified because the movie is, again, all of those things. But I do feel like there are people who will find themselves connecting with the movie's deeper theme when it comes to the father-son relationship, and do feel like the writers did a decent job implementing that aspect of it, as I found it to be pretty effective. I actually was moved to a few tears during the scene where that theme becomes fully realized because I couldn't help but relate it to my own feelings and love for my own kids. And I do think that there are some pretty good comedic Looney Tunes moments that feature nice-looking animation, both traditional and CG, and also really enjoyed Don Cheadle's extremely animated and amusingly awkward performance as the movie's main baddie. And most importantly for me, it was a movie that I had fun with overall, and that my kids and I enjoyed watching together. We all laughed together and we had a blast pretty much throughout the duration of the whole movie, again, past the first 15 minutes or so. Being that one of the primary objectives of this movie is to serve as a family film, I'd have to suggest that it passes that test pretty well. Overall, I'd personally give the movie a rating of 7 out of 10 and had a good time with it, but I certainly don't expect that everyone's gonna hold it in as high esteem as I do. If you're a parent who grew up enjoying the first movie and whose kids enjoy Looney Tunes, then I'd recommend this movie to you and think it's likely you'll have a decent time with it. If you're a non-parent and you grew up loving the first movie and just have high nostalgia for that one, then I could see this movie going either way for you. Some will probably love it, some will probably walk away saying, I'll stick with the 90s, thanks. I would suggest that if you absolutely hated the first film, or were never a fan of that one to begin with, then there's probably no reason for you to check this movie out, as it probably has absolutely nothing of value to offer you, despite my argument that it does possess certain elements of filmmaking that do make it a more well-crafted film compared to the first. Whereas I stand by that argument, I wouldn't argue that these elements are delivered well enough to impress or create new fans based off of them. But that's just my opinion. Space Jam: A New Legacy was just released into theaters and on HBO Max this past Friday, July 16th. So if you want to go check it out for yourself after watching this review, please come back and let me know in the comments what you thought about it. I want to thank everybody out there for watching today's review, and I hope that everybody out there is doing well, and I'll see everybody in the next video.